Hi BookTube, it's Amy. I'm here with my Friday reads. So last weekend I finished one book and started and completed a second book. The first book that I finished up with was a book by Judith Coffin titled Sex, Love, and Letters. And it's a look at the fan mail that Simone de Beauvoir received after the writing of her major works. So the letters she received from readers after she published The Mandarins, after The Second Sex was published, and after each volume of her memoirs were published. And the author takes a fairly academic look at the themes that emerge from those letters, and it's sort of a social snapshot of a certain time in French culture, which was quite interesting, although it didn't do right off the bat exactly what I thought the book was going to do. So the dust jacket, the way it was pitched, was solely something that's going to look at those letters from readers, and I thought it would be some sort of, of analysis, some sort of reflective look at her work and the interaction between her and her readers. And in a way it was, but the early part of the book, so the first third to half of the book, wasn't looking at those letters at all. Rather, it was looking at some of the media articles and other books that were published around the same time that she published, and looking at how those things may have influenced how readers perceived her books and her writings, which is interesting in and of itself, but that's not really what I came for. I came for what's in the second, third half of the book, which is really the author looking at those letters and the themes that emerge. So Simone de Beauvoir was writing about a lot of socially poignant and sensitive subjects in her day. And so she had people writing her very intimate letters about, their relationships, their marriages, their sexuality, people asking her for the name of abortion clinics because she was somewhat vocal about that in her writing. And through her writing, especially through her memoirs, she built this false intimacy with her readers, a sort of intimacy that Coffin says really encouraged them to look on her as a confidant, as someone not only who they can write to, but who wants to be written to, someone who has already started the dialogue with them. And so for that reason, de Beauvoir got hundreds, if not thousands, of very personal letters throughout her lifetime. And Coffin sort of makes the case that de Beauvoir saw these letters as something very important, and certainly as part of a dialogue, because she saved most of them. Although she didn't, archive them or label them, put them in order anyway, she did keep sort of boxes of these letters in her apartment where they were found after her death, and where they eventually made their way to an archive and into the hands of Coffin, who published this book this year, I believe, in 2020, or perhaps that's the hardcover only. Nope, this year. It did come out in September of this year. So this is a fairly new look at the writings of Simone de Beauvoir. And it is certainly more on the academic side of things rather than the popular history side of things. But I enjoyed that one. And then I read this novel from 1944 called Our Hearts Were Young and Gay. And I had no idea what I was getting into. I can't remember whether I paid a few dollars for this or picked this up out of a Little Free Library. I think it might have come from a Little Free Library, but it was something I had never heard of, and I just sort of finally picked it up on a whim last Saturday. And it's got these wonderful illustrations throughout, same illustration on the cover, and I shared this illustration on Instagram last weekend. So the novel is about these two young 19-year-old women, Emily and Cornelia, and based on the names of the authors, Cornelia Otis Skinner and Emily Kimbrough, I am guessing it is somewhat based on perhaps their own experiences, but it's about their trip to what they call the continent and London. So they go to London first, and then they head on to France, where they spend some time in and around Normandy, and then go on to Paris. And they have all sorts of just ridiculous, laugh out loud adventures. So for instance, when we first meet them, they've both arrived from the United States in Montreal, where they're going to be catching an ocean liner to head over to London. Because of where they're situated, they are getting that ship at Montreal, heading down the St. Lawrence out into the ocean and across that way. And so it's certainly an era in the 1920s when nobody was flying to Europe. It wasn't a thing yet. If you were going to Europe, you were taking a boat, an ocean liner. And they arrive in this hotel room, and they're both wearing, 1920s fashions. They have gotten themselves all got up. They care a lot about fashion, about how they look. They're trying to look, classy, like sophisticated women of the world. But both of their mothers have given them these purse-like contraptions that hang down between the legs and fasten to the waist. And there's something from the 19th century, so something their mothers or aunts would have been wearing when they traveled in Europe to prevent their purses from being stolen, and they're designed to be worn under sort of voluptuous layers of skirts. Now in the 1920s, skirts are a lot thinner, a lot less layers, and a lot shorter. And so everybody can see that there's sort of this weird lump in their dress, and there's a scene where they're wearing these purse contraptions on the ship, so their money and passports and letters of credit don't get stolen, and they decide to get up and dance with these two young gentlemen in the ballroom. But the problem is these purses start to swing, and they are both absolutely mortified, and the young men have no idea what's going on, so they scurry back off in embarrassment to their stateroom and remove those purses, and they sort of wear them on and off when they feel they need to, but it's sort of a comedy of errors in that regard. And of course, that's after they actually get off, because I looked up this historical event, but they are set to sail on a ship called the Montcalm in June of 1922. And on June 2nd of 1922, as I looked up online, the Montcalm ocean liner ran aground in the St. Lawrence River, and almost 900 passengers had to be evacuated and put on other ships. Now, this novel doesn't cover it, but I did discover that the ship wasn't completely lost as they make it out to be here. They're two young women traveling for the first time, and so they're like, oh my God, we've been shipwrecked, and they're in tears, they're freaking out. But in actuality, the Montcalm was refloated several days later. But so at the beginning of this novel, they spend a couple more days in and around the Montreal area, just waiting to get on a new ship. But at some point, someone falls over, and one of the girls tries to throw a deck chair, and the deck chair bangs the guy who's stuck in the water on the head, and one of them ends up getting measles, and they end up accidentally staying overnight in a brothel, and they meet a couple of gay men, but don't know that they're gay, and so they're quite confused, and they're like, oh, they must be actors because they're wearing makeup. And it's just, one thing after another with their naive view of the world, often putting them in absolutely ridiculous situations. And it was quite fun from start to finish. And as I said, we do have these lovely illustrations throughout. So for instance, this is when Emily decided to teach a dance lesson on their ocean liner in this quite ridiculous costume. There's a funny scene where one of them gets pulled into a tennis game. Actually, there are 2 tennis incidents in this book. Neither of them are very good at playing tennis or dressing for a tennis game, for that matter. But as I said, absolutely hilarious from start to finish. I enjoyed it. If you do come across it, I would recommend it. Novel from 1944. So that's what I read last weekend. At this point, I'm not sure what I have planned for the coming week. I'm sort of in between books. I didn't end up beginning Paris Interzone by James Campbell yet. Maybe that'll be on the slate for this weekend, but that's sort of up in the air. I'm going to decide tomorrow on Saturday when I sit down to read. But not book related, I wanted to show you something that arrived in the mail for me today, and maybe you can see it on the turntable just behind me there. I had it playing before I filmed this, but this is one of the Taylor Swift folklore vinyls that I ordered. I got the Clandestine Meetings special edition, and I do have the Betty's Garden vinyl coming as well. And I wasn't sure when this was going to arrive because it shipped almost 2 weeks ago now, but this is going to sound very familiar to Canadians, but it was stuck in Mississauga for about a week, and I had no idea when it was going to get released from Mississauga. But this is the Clandestine Meetings edition, and it's got these lovely photographs in the center, and it is a 2-disc, 2-vinyl set. And they are this beautiful color, and I admit the reason I purchased this particular special edition was because of the cover. So it's this pinky, purpley color, and you've got Taylor Swift in the center. I'll just put this back into the dust sleeve. Lyrics, photograph of her. The other sleeve, the disc is on the turntable because I was listening. Rest of the lyrics, and then this gorgeous black and white photograph here. And I'm trying not to get glare because these photographs are quite shiny. But I am quite thrilled to have this. I've been waiting for this ever since I pre-ordered in July, and to me this is the best album of the year, probably the best album that she's ever made. I first listened to Taylor Swift back when she was being introduced to country radio in 2008, 2007, 2008. So think the Tim McGraw, Teardrops on My Guitar era. And I was an obsessed teenager from about the age of 13 to 15 or 16. I purchased the Love Story album when it came out, and I purchased Speak Now, but when she moved over into pop, I stopped buying her albums. I would listen when the songs came on the radio, and I would listen to some stuff on YouTube, but I was really out of touch with most of her core albums for the past 5-10 years almost, really. Never bought the Red album, never bought the 1989 album, didn't even listen to the Reputation album except for a couple songs that popped up online and whatnot. Didn't buy the Lover album, but when Folklore came out and I heard that it was coming out and what it was going to be, I just knew that it was going to be something that I would love. And this is probably the best thing that 2020 has given us. The songwriting is excellent, and every last song on the album really speaks to, I guess, feelings and emotions that have been this year. And to me, it's such a joy and a comfort to listen to. And so I've got this edition of the vinyl, and as I said, I've also got Betty's Garden coming as well. She released for pre-order back in July and early August several different special editions of the vinyl. And I certainly didn't buy them all because that would have cost me several $100s. but I did purchase 2 of them, and I am quite pleased to be able to listen to this one on vinyl. And I think, 3 of my favorite songs on the album are The Lakes, which is the bonus track, which just happened to have this sort of serendipitous coincidence with my own reading early in the summer, because The Lakes is about, in part, the lake poets, William Wordsworth, Coleridge, and the people who lived in the Lake District of England, those romantic poets. I just happened to be reading them right around the time this album came out. And so that song has special significance for me because it's a moment when the music I was listening to and my reading life sort of intertwined in a very pleasing way. And Betty, which is another song on the album, certainly draws me back into that country era of her music, and that's a beautiful song as well. And then Epiphany is just this really emotionally hard-hitting song that talks about someone at war, then also someone working in the medical profession during this pandemic. And the opening to that song, it almost reminds me of being in church. It's got that sort of deep, almost pipe organ or organ sound, but it also makes you feel as though you're standing sort of in a wide open canopy in a forest or something, and all sorts of emotions that are evoked by this album. And if you haven't listened to the Folklore album yet, even if you don't consider yourself a Taylor Swift fan, I would recommend that you go and sort of give it a listen, because that is my favorite album by her, if not my favorite album by anybody ever. So I'll leave it there. Do let me know what you have planned this weekend, what you're reading this coming week, and I hope you have an excellent weekend.